touch him, and I will destroy everything you love." In the noon heat of a market square that smelled of frying cassava and damp hay, Sarian Martin sold hand-stitched scarves and small bags of coffee while people passed with the lazy certainty of lives that rarely changed. Maurice Sam arrived that day like a storm. He had money, a truck that grumbled, and a laugh that made people straighten up in their stalls. "Mom, I need you," Sarian whispered to her mother as she tied a new knot on a scarf, and her voice trembled like a small bell. The mayor walked through the stalls with his entourage as if the market belonged to him. He wore his power like a coat and smelled faintly of cigar smoke. You will see what he did the day the three of them stood under the old tamarind tree, and why the whole village took a side. But what did Maurice do when he found Sarian at the stall? The tamarind leaves snapped above as if they wanted to listen. The refrain came back from time to time, quiet and edge-shaped like a prayer and a threat. "Oh, my child, oh, my child," the women hummed as they shared gossip and bread. The story begins small and becomes large because small things in this place do not stay small. They rustle, they spread, they scorch. Sarian was 31. She had the hands of someone who had done the same careful work for years, and the eyes of someone who had decided not to look away. Maurice Sam was 37, a man who had returned after a spell in a city and brought ideas, promises, and an envelope of cash. Between them stood Tomas Rivera, a gentle teacher from the school, with a laugh that smelled of chalk and river water, and a promise he had been too afraid to make explicit until he could not avoid it any longer. The village held a third presence, too. Mayor Ortega, the man whose picture hung in the municipal office and whose voice could close down a road, liked to remind people that things happened because he allowed them. He would speak at the town meeting and say the right words and look everyone in the eye. He would say that peace is expensive and control is cheaper. The incident began with a touch, or the accusation of a touch, and then everything else followed like falling tiles. In private, Sarian had had a moment with Tomas beneath the school awning where he had confessed his longing. In public, Maurice had shoved past a basket and taken her wrist, not gently. The villagers watched. Some saw shame, others saw menace. The first reactions were small noises. A shoe scraping against a stone. A child covered his ears. Then the sound changed into words, and words into alliances. Lila, who runs the bakery and knows everyone past and present, looked away. Rosa, who keeps the ledger at the little cooperative, frowned and then whispered to Mira at the well. Grandpa Harlan, who remembers 2 wars and 3 floods, spat and muttered that the world moves in circles. Pastor James, who holds Sunday like a lifeline, said to Maurice once in passing that every man would answer for his deeds. Officer Ellis, who knows procedure but is shy in crowds, took notes later. These people would be named because in a small place, names are the architecture of memory. The market scene is thick in scents, heat on skin, coffee fumes and sugar sweat, the rough bark of the tamarind tree under fingernails, the metallic sting of a coin placed too loudly on a scale, the sound of a rooster cutting the air. Sarian felt the sun press across her shoulder blades and the weight of a hand that was not hers retreat and then grip again. She smelled the fried plantains and Maurice's cologne, too sharp, mixed with the copper odor of anger. Tomas left a half-folded newspaper on a crate, his chalky hand still smelling like dust. The audience of the market learned the lines slowly, and then they repeated them until a rumor had its own life. Backstory for Sarian Martin unfolds like a slow river in 3 long paragraphs. She grew up in a house with a tin roof and a mother who knew how to stitch the hems of grief into humor. Her father left when she was 8, and the village learned the lesson that honor sometimes masks cowardice. She learned to sew at 11 to help pay for bread and later took to mending school uniforms for the children so they would not be shamed. There was a fire when she was 16 that melted a whole row of stalls and burned her favorite scarf, the one with blue thread her grandmother had woven. She never married, not because she could not, but because each time someone promised her the moon, the promise slid from their hands. When she met Tomas, she thought for a while that the quiet of the river and the patience of the classroom might finally be steadiness. And then Maurice returned from the city with a promise of a small factory that would employ 20 people and clean up the river. He held town meetings and spread glossy papers. Sarian believed in the idea of work that stayed in place and fed children. She believed for one season, but she remembered every betrayal that had come before and learned to keep one small corner of her heart guarded like coin in a tin. The present conflict ties to this history because Maurice's promises speak loud to the village's hunger, but his hands and his methods hit at the exact place where Sarian had kept her boundary. The market hearing dissolves into conversations that are long and close. This scene contains 8 exchanges. Sarian looked up at Maurice when he reached across the stall. He moved like a man who had been used to getting things by asking politely and then by taking. "You cannot just grab me like that," she said, voice low. "What are you saying, Sarian?" Maurice asked, smiling as if uncertainty were a joke. He smelled of oil and fresh paper. "I am saying watch what you do," she answered. Her fingers tightened around a cut of blue thread. Tomas stepped forward, a small man with a teacher's posture. "Leave her alone," he said. His voice carried chalk dust like an armor. Maurice laughed. "And who are you to tell me? The school teacher now plays guardian," he said. The laugh was sharp enough to cut. "Who I am is who I always was," Tomas said, "and I will not let you frighten us." A crowd gathered. Lila moved to the edge and said loudly, "We will not have trouble on market day." Her voice held the warmth of bread and the edge of warning. Grandpa Harlan muttered, "Men with trucks are trouble or work. Most of them are both." The crowd half laughed, half agreed. The air smelled of sweat and jasmine. The exchange ended with Maurice turning his truck key as if to punctuate his exit, his fingers pressing hard. The incident, inciting reaction, moves to the mayor's office, where the mayor gives his version in a speech that is both smooth and full of the quiet threat of someone used to being obeyed. He speaks to convince the marketplace that order is more profitable than scandal. His language is polished, his gestures measured. He calls for calm and promises an investigation that will respect tradition and the law, which the town clerks will register at the notary. He talks about employment and the promise of a factory and about keeping the village united. He looks at Sarian and says with a hint of amusement that the best way forward is to trust leaders. The speech hides the way power can transform a word into a chain. People clap because applause is cheap and expected. Sensorial detail tracks here: the slickness of the mayor's gloves, the faint taste of tobacco at the back of his throat, the scratch of his pen against the paper, the heat of eyes on Sarian's back. Those sensorial notes remind the listener that leadership smells like money and leaves a taste in mouths. Across the village, the debate splits. Tomas organizes a small meeting at the school. He calls for witnesses. He writes names on a chalkboard. He asks people to sign an affidavit if they saw the hand that gripped Sarian's wrist too hard. Officer Ellis writes down dates and suggests a formal complaint. Pastor James volunteers his parsonage for a mediation, so long as no threats are made. Rosa starts a small fundraiser to pay for a legal filing because the nearest attorney sits in the town over and his fees are a mountain for poor pockets. Lila offers Maurice. Bread for meetings, and both comfort and gossip flow in equal measure. Mira at the well remembers that fast decisions often make slow wounds, and she tells people to breathe. These named characters build a mesh of reaction that feels like both solidarity and pressure. Their names will appear again at the big meeting when the village chooses a side. The exploration of conflict grows with a longer back and forth inside Sarian's small house, where the scent of boiled cassava and lavender soap sits beneath a thin radio playing a hymn. This scene must have 8 to 10 exchanges and sensory flourishes in every line. Sarian's mother, Rosa, folded a scarf and looked at her daughter. "You were brave at the market," she said. Her skin smelled like starch and vanilla. "I was not brave," Sarian answered. Her voice was flat like pressed linen. "I was careful." "Careful does not stop men with money," Rosa said. Her hands trembled as if the years had knots. "Then we must make sure money cannot buy silence," Sarian said, and she thought of the blue scarf burned in her youth. "Do you want retribution or peace?" Rosa asked. Her question was the small, precise knife of a mother who weighs harm against a child's future. "Justice," Sarian said. "Justice means telling the truth and letting the law take its course." Rosa closed her eyes, then opened them. "The law will take its course with what it has. We will need witnesses and proof and courage." "I have courage. I have witnesses. I have a mother who knows how to bake and a teacher who believes," Sarian said. And the radio hummed under the words like a steady heart. The village moves into escalation as Maurice begins to use his influence. He calls a public dinner, seating the better off in a long row and the rest on wooden benches. He talks in the mayor's ear and offers small contracts to the families who might otherwise stand with Sarian. He promises a water pump if the town supports his project. He brings a surveyor to point at the river and the land, and he frames his plan as salvation. He speaks publicly with that soft authoritarian tone and says again about unity and jobs. At a round of applause, he smiles, and the sound of the applause feels like the clinking of coins. People who rely on daily wages find their loyalties stretched like thread. It is here the community's pressure reveals itself as both fragility and force. Leela whispers to Rosa that their bakery cannot refuse a contract for bread for the new site, and Rosa replies that without bread, there is no argument. The scene smells of coffee and oil, warmed metal of a generator someone provided, the faint sweetness of promises in the air. The scene shifts to a private confrontation that will be a moment of tension. This moment must be between 500 and 600 characters and feel like a compressed thunderbolt of choice. Maurice places a cardboard envelope on a wooden table and leans. He speaks soft. "You will help me speak to the town," he says. "There is a future." Sarian listens to the scrape of his watch and the rhythm of a truck idling outside. "Not like this," she replies. "Not if it means your hand on someone else." Maurice's face hardens. He says the word no like a verdict. The tension tastes metallic in Sarian's mouth as she realizes that money can buy 1,000 things except the truth. Tomas organizes witnesses, and the schoolroom becomes a repository of sworn statements and cloth bundles of memory. The scene grows with 5 to 8 named reactions and technical description when they file the complaint through official channels. The legal step is described in plain technical terms so it reads credible and grounded. They prepare a formal complaint and affidavit signed by 8 witnesses, filed with the county clerk, who logs the date and gives them a receipt. They must wait 30 days for the initial response, and once the complaint is stamped, it moves to an intake officer who will decide whether to open a formal investigation. A notary confirms signatures, and the file is assigned a case number. The legal description is exact and brief because procedure is a different kind of weight. This paragraph runs roughly 300 characters and contains precise steps and time windows so the viewer believes the process is happening and changing the stakes. The story then needs moments of tension, longer ones, 3 such passages, each 500 to 600 characters, to puncture the rising action. The first moment of tension is a memory that returns to Sarian like a bruise. She remembers her father leaving under a heavy rain and the way her mother did not cry until the next day. The memory is tactile, the wet fabric of a shirt, the rasp of his voice. That recollection gives her a clarity about what it means to be abandoned by people you trusted. It hardens a resolve so that when Maurice stands in town promising to give jobs, she will not be bought by nostalgia. The second moment of tension comes at night when someone scratches the paint of Sarian's stall truck. The sound is small and deliberate, a marker of intimidation. She wakes to metallic scrape and breathes the cool air and counts her breaths until dawn, feeling both fear and determination. The third moment of tension is the day of the hearing when the town square fills and someone throws a bottle that breaks like brittle glass. Glass smells like a kind of tiny violence. It opens conversation into danger and fear. Each of these moments slows the narrative and forces a choice. The halfway mark brings a CTA positioned roughly at 1/3 of the total narrative to engage the audience. Pause and breathe. We know this is heavy, and you may carry memories of your own place with you. If you feel moved right now, tell us what you would do in a similar situation. Start your comment with, "I come from," and a short sentence about your town or village. Your words matter because they help others see that these problems are not isolated, that the choices between justice and silence are shared in many places. Leave your thought and hold a place for the people who read them after you. We listen and we learn. Now back to the story. The conflict turns to a small local tribunal convened under the old tamarind tree. The tribunal has the pastor, a community elder, a representative of the school, and a clerk. The mood is tense, and sensory details anchor the scene. Dust lifts in a circle as people shift their feet. A child sucks on a sticky candy and stamps to keep away from adult air. The tribunal hears testimony. It hears loud and quiet voices. It hears the knot of community where reputation fights with truth. Maurice presents his side with slick papers and the engineer who drew plans for the factory. He produces a letter of intent from a business partner and a photograph of a potential site. Tomas presents the signed affidavits and reads the words carefully, his voice sometimes breaking on names. The pastor asks both to stand and reminds them that truth matters for the soul of the village. The tribunal cannot carry out a legal conviction, but it can sway the village and the market. And sway is a kind of law in small places. Sarian has to choose how public she wants the matter to be. There are nights when she sits alone with a cup of coffee that tastes like burnt patience and thinks of the possibilities. She imagines a simple life that includes textile work, children who will not be ashamed, and a school that stays open because teachers do not leave. She imagines Maurice's factory bringing some real jobs, but also the risk that a town with a new payroll will forget how to ask hard questions. She asks herself whether reparations are enough and if a signed apology will erase a bruised wrist. She asks whether a man who threatens will learn not to threaten because he was shamed, or whether he will learn to hide better. These choices are not theoretical. They are folded into the daily bread of people around her. A dramatic public climax arrives during the mayor's festival introduction ceremony, where Maurice has paid to sponsor the music, the food, and the small fair. People arrive because festivals are obligations and joys. The mayor takes the microphone and speaks in the voice of reconciliation, but everyone waits for the point where truth must be spoken. Tomas stands, pale but steady, and asks that the mayor recognize the complaint and allow the police to present the facts. Maurice takes the stage at that point, and his voice becomes a polished, the instrument of charm. He accuses the teacher of fanaticism and says the village must not be torn by personal grudges. The crowd divides, a seam that runs through friends and families. Leela crosses to Tomas with the loaf under her arm and whispers a short sentence, which in effect says, "The village will buy bread, but not silence."
The music falters. In the press of bodies, someone whispers, "Oh, my child," and it passes along the rows like warm smoke. The private crisis is a confrontation in the mayor's office late at night when the mayor offers Sarian a private meeting. It is supposed to be a resolution, but it bears the same soft cruelty as acceptance with conditions. The tension is long and compressed here, and this is one of the formal moments of decision. The conversation has depth and physical detail. The mayor's office is air-conditioned and smells of polished wood, and the hum of a fan keeps rhythm like a pulse. He offers a financial package and a promise of a small shop for Sarian if she withdraws her complaint. He tells her that she must consider the community's good. "We cannot let this ruin the project," he says. "Think of the people who need the factory." Sarian looks at the stamped municipal seal on his desk, and her hand rests on a wooden chair that creaks under the weight of a long decision. She thinks of the burned scarf and the sound of Tomas Rivera reading the affidavits. Her reply is sharp. The community's good is not a ledger where names are erased. People outside the office hear nothing, but the air inside the room vibrates. The mayor's jaw tightens and he says, "You will regret a choice that ruins people's work." She leaves without a promise and with a new clarity that the battle is both public and intimate. The narrative must foreshorten and then expand into procedural detail when the complaint moves to a formal review. This technical description is factual and in plain language. The case file is assigned a number by the county clerk. The intake officer has 14 days to decide whether to open an investigation. If the decision is affirmative, forensic evidence is requested, and any assault allegations trigger a preliminary interview within 10 days. Witness statements are recorded under oath and preserved by a notary. The formal review requires 3 signatures and a deadline of 30 days for initial administrative response. These steps sound bureaucratic, but they create real pressure and a framework for action so the viewer can follow what happens next. Tension rises as Maurice starts a whisper campaign, and the village feels the pull of money against solidarity. He offers small favors to families to encourage them to speak in his favor. He promises jobs, he pays for a new roof on the community hall, he supports the pastor's choir with a last-minute donation. People who accept his money do not always know that they have begun to trade away a future argument for present comfort. Pastor James struggles in the middle, balancing sermon obligations with the knowledge that if the town rips apart, the congregation will suffer. He meets Sarian in the empty churchyard at dawn. Their exchange is quiet and carries echoes. He says, "It is not charity to bind wounds and then leave the scar." She answers, "We will not trade the truth for a meal." The church bells ring a thin note that seems like a question. In private, Maurice confesses something to a confidant, a sliver of vulnerability that complicates his villainy. He says that he had been hurt by a man in the city, and that often men who hurt carry old hurt like a secret wound. He says he never wanted to be cruel, but power feels inevitable. The confidant, Mira from the well, hears this and does not excuse him. Instead, she names his fear as a human fear and warns him that fear can be shaped in different ways. This scene is sensorially detailed. Mira's hands smell of well water and lemon. Maurice drinks bitter coffee and the cup leaves a ring. The room is humid and the electricity hums. The sound of a truck idling far away punctuates the sentence. As the legal process advances, a public hearing is scheduled 67 days after the first complaint. The hearing pulls the village into its orbit. People come with signs and with bread and with small tokens to show their allegiance. The courtroom is full of dust and sun and the scratch of pens. The evidence is laid out. Tomas reads affidavits. Officer Ellis presents photos of a red mark on Sarian's wrist, taken on a day the vending records confirm Maurice's presence. Maurice produces a letter from a contractor and a recorded video where he speaks in a tone of apology that can be read 2 ways. The adjudicator, an external mediator named Judge Alvarez, listens with a calm face and then calls for a recess. The scene holds the senses of the village in a slow tautness. People sweat under fans, the smell of stale cigarettes in the building is thick, and someone laughs nervously when asked to take an oath. The climactic public confrontation arrives when Tomas, prompted by evidence and by a small act of courage from Leela, who brings forward a ledger, publicly reveals that Maurice has been wiring funds to 2 families to persuade their testimony. The room gasps. The revelation is a ripple that becomes a wave because in small places, money is visible. The proof sits on a table, numbers and dates clear like a map. Maurice stands and his composure falters. He speaks, "I wanted the village to prosper." Tomas answers, "Prosperity cannot be built on fear and false witness." The adjudicator calls for a pause and then a failed attempt at reconciliation. The crowd splits, but now the split has facts to it. Names were once whispered, now are spoken. Consequences come fast. The employer withdraws a letter of intent when the contractor calls to say he will not be associated with bribery. Mayor Ortega sees the political fallout and shifts his language to caution. Maurice is asked to step back from the project pending investigation, and his finances are examined in public registry. Small reparations are discussed. A community fund begins a vaquina to support Sarian and to pay for the courthouse costs. The fund grows by small amounts from many hands, and the sight of coins added to a jar by elders and children alike feels like slow justice. The village forms a committee to oversee the factory proposal transparently if it ever returns. The committee includes Rosa, Leela, Tomas, Mira, and Grandpa Harlan as a sign that the village will refuse to let power speak alone. The names matter because the village must look itself in the eye and decide. A public apology arrives finally, but it is complicated. Maurice stands at the market with a microphone and reads a careful statement. His language tries to make the wound smaller. He says he regrets that anger became louder than affection and asks the village for forgiveness. He volunteers to fund a garden and contribute to a scholarship for a child to go to the city to study. The apology is met with mixed responses. Some accept it as a start. Others demand accountability. Sarian hears the words and feels the old burn of being asked to accept less than full truth. She meets Maurice after the speech and says plainly, "You can apologize, but you must live differently." He nods and looks away. Immediate consequences include agreements on community oversight and the signing of minutes at the municipal office that commit the mayor's committee to transparent procurement and a public advisory board. The notary stamps the agreement. Officer Ellis files a report that will move to an administrative review if any irregularities continue. These procedural records add weight and make clear that words must sit in paper and in public registry to prevent the old patterns. The palpable sensation of relief is tempered by the knowledge that wounds do not heal immediately. The village practices both joy and caution at the next market. The epilogue arrives with 3 moments in time to show the slow work of repair. 1 month later, the jar of coins for Sarian's legal costs is still on the bakery counter, and 3 children come each week to receive small colored scarves sewn by Sarian. She teaches a class at the school on repair and mending, and the smell of fabric and glue and coffee fills the room. She is quieter now, but more intentional. Tomas helps crowdsource materials, and the school sees small boosts in attendance because parents feel safer. The village holds a small ceremony to thank witnesses and people who held the truth. The event tastes like boiled rice and sweet plantain and feels like the beginnings of trust. 3 months later, the municipal committee publishes a short report online and in the town hall about procurement and oversight. A small grant is awarded to fund a community library, and the old hall gets a new roof paid for by many small donors. Maurice has started a local mentorship program, but steps back from leadership roles, and the town watches to see if his actions match his words. Rosa opens a small stall selling packaged snacks for the workers at the community projects. The bacterial contamination that used to clog the river has a new filter system funded by a crowd cause and maintained by volunteers. The village is a different pace now. The refrains of "Oh, my child" come less as exasperation and more as a worn expression of guardianship. 6 months later, Sarian is offered a small contract to supply scarves for a new community center. The contract is fair and jointly overseen. She hires 2 local women who had been out of work. Tomas has been promoted to head of a small regional education effort, and the school receives supplies. Maurice attends an accountability meeting and listens. He volunteers to fund a scholarship, but he does not insist on leadership. The municipal registry shows signed minutes and a public portal where procurement records are visible. The village feels like a town that learned to watch itself, not because of one triumph, but because of the way many kept bringing the truth into light. There are still awkward mornings, and there are still nights when the market smells of hard work and old worries. But there is also an honest ledger on the wall. The final reflection shrinks down to one intimate paragraph, where Sarian looks at a seam she has stitched into a scarf and remembers the burned blue scarf of her youth. She touches the new seam and feels both the memory and the present mend. She thinks of her mother and of the many voices that stood with her, and knows that forgiveness will be patient and justice should be a practice. She says quietly, "Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is learning to live with your eyes open." The village has learned to do the same. If this story moved you, tell us below how your community would decide. If you want to hear more stories like this, subscribe and stay with us as we follow the slow work of rebuilding. In the end, the market keeps its rhythms, the tamarind tree keeps its shade, and the people continue to make choices. The last line that lingers is simple and bittersweet and fits the rhythm of the place. Among the stalls and the coffee steam, they learned to keep watch and to stitch again, one careful hand at a time.